Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I want to address a lot of the criticism that minimal APIs are getting in .NET 6. Mainly because I did make a video on the feature showcasing it, and you can see the code I came up with here. It's very simple. This is all the code we have for the API. And even though the video did great and it got very good feedback on the feature itself, the feature also got a fair amount of criticism. People are saying that this is just for demos, that this would never scale, you would never put this in production, this is just to come up with something and throw it away. Or that this is not like my enterprise application, whatever that means. So in this video, I want to basically debunk all this. I'm going to refactor this to a more elegant way of using minimal APIs. And it will be something that I would personally put to production. I'm also going to run load tests against that and the equivalent of this in the old MVC or web API approach, and show you how you can make this testable and why minimal APIs are overall a great feature that I will be using. If you like this type of content and you want to see more, make sure you're subscribing the notification bell to get alerted when I upload a new video. So I haven't really changed anything from that first video. The only thing I've done is I've added this secret sauce folder here. I won't show you what's in there, but we will be using this secret sauce to make this a more elegant API. And as I'm going along, I'm going to show you what's in there. So let's clean this up a bit, because currently two things shouldn't be here. This customer record and this customer repository, those should not be here. So let's clear it up. I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder here, and I'm going to call this models. And I'm going to make another one, and I'm going to call it repositories. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create a new class here. So I'm going to create the customer class. So customer.cs. And I'm going to copy that record and put that in there. Here is our record with the namespace, all nice and tidy. And I'm going to do the same for the customer repository. So I'm going to create a new customer repository here. And then I'm going to paste the code exactly as it is. So the code is here. Let me just import all the missing stuff, which should be just the customer model. Great. So that's here. So the two things that shouldn't be there in the first place are no longer there. Now, the next thing that could be better is actually these endpoints, because if you just keep adding endpoints using the map method in the program.cs, this will get very bloated. Also, this is not really unit testable at this stage. So how do we do that? Well, let's fix the bloating thing first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call that endpoint definitions. And what I'm going to do is, since I want to define a bunch of endpoints in a structured way, I'm going to call this the customer endpoint definition. And this is where I'm going to define my endpoints. So this will implement the endpoint definition interface, and I'm going to import that. And then I'm going to implement the members. And it has two methods. It has a define endpoints method, and it has a define services method. You probably understand where this is going. In the services, I'm going to register all the DI components that I need for those endpoints. And in the define endpoints, I'm going to define my endpoints. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take all of these endpoints here, just cut them and paste them in here. And then I'm going to import all the missing things like the customer repository and the customer model. So that is now here. And then the other thing I was registering up here is the customer repository. So it will no longer be here. So I'm going to delete that, and I can delete that as well. And I'm going to register it where it should be, in that define services method. So services.add singleton like it was, and then customer repository goes here. And now I have my customer repository registered. And really, that's it in terms of organization. I'm going to show you how we can turn this into something that is unit testable. But for now, that's all the restructuring we're going to do. But obviously now we no longer actually register those endpoints in the middlewares and the dependency injection framework. So how do we fix that? Well, I'm going to go in the builder here. I'm going to say builder.services.add endpoint definitions. And this is one of the methods in the secret sauce folder. And what I want to do in this method, because it accepts an array of types, I will need to give it a pointer to assembly scan my assembly to find everything implementing this interface and register all those endpoints dynamically. So all I want to do is say type of, and then point to any of the types that I can see in this project. I can use the customer one, it doesn't matter, any type would do. This has nothing to do with what we're actually registering. This has everything to do with the assembly scanning. So that's done now. And the last thing I want to do is say app.use endpoint definitions, another secret sauce method. And now that's it. That's your program.cs. that's your endpoint definition, very organized. You can see what services are required for this specific endpoint definition, and you can work with it. And if you want to add more, you can add it here. And if you want to add more endpoints, you can add them here. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to just run this to show you that it actually still works. So API is running. I'm going to try to get all the customers. I have nothing in the database, the in-memory database. So I'm going to go ahead and create one. And as you can see, Nick was created. I can now list it. This is all calling that API, by the way. And in case you don't believe me, for some reason, I can put a breakpoint here and then hit that endpoint, and you see that this endpoint is hit. This is exactly where my code is going. And now I can go ahead, and if I want to read it, I can read it. I can update it to my evil brother Tom Chapsas, which doesn't exist. And then I can delete that. And as you can see, nothing in the database anymore. And this is significantly more organized. But the problem is this really flexible? So let's see. This thing doesn't currently have Swagger. So how do we enable Swagger support? Well, it's actually pretty easy. All I want to do is I want to create a new endpoint definition. So I can say Swagger endpoint definition here. And you don't have to do this. You can make an extension method specific to Swagger and do that in the program.cs. But I don't want to bloat this program.cs, so I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to say I endpoint definition like I did before. I'm going to import that. I'm going to implement the missing members. And then I need to implement these two methods. For Swagger middlewares, you need these two, use Swagger and use Swagger UI. And for the services, you need these two, the add endpoints API Explorer and the add Swagger gen. And once I do that, that's the only thing I added, by the way. I didn't touch anything else in the whole project. I'm going to run this, and then I'm going to go to my web browser. And as you can see, simple API, Swagger support. I can go in the endpoints. I can call them and they return. Obviously nothing now because nothing is in the database. I can do all of those things, and I didn't have to change anything in my project. And I now have Swagger support dynamically. So that's, I think, a really cool and nice way to go about it. Now, let's go ahead and make this a bit more proper, because the problem with this approach is that now I can't really unit test this. You know, how do you write a unit test that has some mock data in the customer repository and then you assert against that? You cannot. So the way you can do it is I'm going to create, obviously, an interface, and you can create an interface in a separate file, but for the purposes of this video, I don't really need to. And sometimes I just keep both interface and class in the same file for brevity. So I'm just gonna add every endpoint. So let me just quickly cut here. So every method is now added in the interface. And what I wanna do is say I customer repository. And once I have that, I can go back to the thing that concerns this repository, which is the customer endpoint definition. And all I need to change is say I customer repository to customer repository. Oh, and of course I have to update the usages of the customer repository. So this goes here, and this goes here. And now if I run this, this should still be working. And it is. I can go ahead, create customer, as you can see, and Swagger is still working as well. So now this is an interface, doesn't necessarily mean that it's testable. So how do you test this delegate? Well, it's actually very simple. You can just extract it. So what is this? This is a method really that accepts a repository, an iCustomer repository, and a GUID, and it returns an I result. So let's take a look at what this looks like. This is the get customer by ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say internal I result, because that's what that thing is returning. And then I'm going to call this get customer by ID. You can omit the customer because it's a bit of a redundant thing within the context of this class, but you can leave it there if you want. And then put the iCustomer repository and the GUID, which is what this method is expecting. And then I can just take that code out of here and put it here. And now this method, since all this really was a delegate, is I can remove that and I can do this. And now this is perfectly acceptable code. You can go ahead and do it with every other of the methods. And since this is an internal thing, you can now perfectly fine unit test it. You can inject the iCustomer repository and the GUID that you want, and you can assert against the iResult exactly like you would do on any other project, really. And you can even turn this to static if you want, but completely up to you. You don't have to. If you don't want to, depending on how you test, you might want to. I'm going to go quickly and do every single one of those methods off camera, just so you have the final result when you get the code. So all the methods have now been extracted. You can see them here. They're all very unit testable. You can inject exactly what this method requires. You don't have to do any elaborate setup as well. So unit testing should be easier. And that's what my define endpoints looks like. Very brief, very, very nice. And as you can see, just to prove that this actually works, I can run the API again, go back here, list the users, nothing in the customer's endpoint. Now I create one, I can list one, and it goes on. And every request goes through that. Before I move on to the next topic, let's take a look at the secret source folder. So the first thing is just the endpoint definition interface. This is an interface I made as part of this demo. And it has these two methods we're implementing. And then I have an endpoint definition extensions class with two methods here. One will assembly scan and try to find everything that this endpoint definition is being implemented by, and register it in DI. So it's going to define all the services that it has and register it itself in DI. And it's going to take it here in the use endpoints, it's going to take it out and define the endpoints one after the other. You can build on top of this, and you can have ordering if you want as well, and maybe checks for no service registration duplication. You can go crazy. This is, again, just an example. You don't have to use exactly what you see on this video, which is true for the first video as well. Now, you're looking at this and you're like, this is a neat way to do it, but why bother? Why would I move from my enterprise way of doing things? Well, let's take a look at this middle project here called performance test. I'm using NBomber, which is a load testing tool, to call the old style API and the minimal API. And these two APIs are both running here. So old style here and minimal API here. And it's gonna run it for a minute each with 25 copies or threads. And all it's really gonna do in the test is gonna try to get the same user over and over again. So it's gonna do a GET request using an ID. And once this is done running, we're gonna collect metrics to compare the old style with a new style. The two styles, by the way, have exactly the same logic and fundamentally code. The old style is using the same repository, the same model, the same everything. The code is the same, it's just using a controller's approach instead of using the new approach with a minimal API. So I'm gonna go ahead here and run those load tests. By the way, both APIs are running in release mode. So let's go ahead and run the load tests as well. You can see NBomber starting. It's going to do a warm up in the beginning for 5 seconds. Could be longer, but for local APIs, it doesn't really matter. And now for a minute flat, it's going to try to stress it as much as it can. And let's see what it comes out with in the end. So NBomber has finished running. It's going to dispose all the things. And now we have some metrics back. And let's see what we have. So as you can see, we did 30,000 requests per second in the old style API. And the new one, we did 34. So 4,000 RPS more for the exact same code. This is a good chunk of a performance increase. Like if you came tomorrow and you said you can have this for free by doing basically nothing, you just change the way your endpoints are called, then I'd be like, hell yeah, let's do it. And this is actually the lowest that I've gotten when I run these tests. It varies from 5 to 6 or 7,000 within that minute. So it just could be that my PC, because I'm recording as well now, is a bit more stressed. So you can see how much benefit you can get for free by using minimal APIs. And really, you don't lose anything in structure. This is, if you ask me, a very decent way to make an API. And a very manageable one as well. If you want to edit one endpoint, you just edit the one thing you want to edit. If you want to add one, you just go ahead and add another one. If you want to add something completely irrelevant, just create a new class and add those endpoints there. It's up to you to utilize this very powerful tool. And that's what I want you to take away from this video. That's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my Patreons for making these videos possible. If you want to support me as well, you're going to find the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you like this video, subscribe for more content like this, and ring the bell as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.